this organ has 2,568 pipes in it. And organ pipes come in two different kinds. Flue pipes, like a chimney flue, F-L-U-E, and reed pipes. And flue pipes are simply a flue. They have a mouth. This one has ears. They have a foot and a toe. And they have tuning slides. And if we had 2,500 people there that we could tap on the back whenever we need to hear a note, you just blow into a pipe. All it needs is air, and it plays. Unfortunately, even back in Roman times, they didn't have enough slaves to do that. So they came up with a way to get air into a box. We call it a wind chest with holes on the top, and then they put the hole in the bottom of the pipe over that hole, and then the air would go from the wind chest into the pipe and play the sound. That's pretty simple if all you want is to hear sound continuously whenever air is pumped into the wind chest. And there have been various ways to get air into a wind chest. The ancient Greeks called the organ the hydraulis because they used a water motor. They used a mill to get air into the system. You can also have a kid on the side, pay him to turn a crank. If you remember the old reed organs from 100 years ago, your feet could pump air, bellows to put air into it. I have to tell you, the most ingenious and fun way to do it, there's still an organ up in Massachusetts. It's the largest pre-electric instrument, and it's a huge structure. And what they have is two ladders and two pedestals and two platforms. And when they're ready to play, one person gets on the top platform and gravity pulls him down. He's pulling a bellows shut so that by the time he reaches the ground, the other person can jump off the perch onto theirs, ride that down, while the other person climbs the ladder up to the top, and you just see them, going up and coming down, and that's how they get air into the bellows. That's how they get air into the wind chest. Methuen, in Mechanics Hall. We use electric motors to get air. If you remember the organ over in the auditorium, that's what we call a mechanical action organ. We turn on a motor, but it's only the motor to get the air in. The organ itself has nothing to do with electricity. If I stood at the side and pumped the crank to get air in, it would play just as well. That's originally, of course, the way organs were constructed before electricity was available. So you have a row of pipes, and this is one term to remember, a rank. There's, of course, one pipe for every note on the keyboard. So there's 61 pipes make a rank, from the lowest note on the keyboard to the highest, okay? And the lowest notes are what? The longest or the shortest? Longest, right? So you see, we have ranks here that are divided for show. If they weren't visible, they could very easily be put from longest to shortest in one line. But these go every other one. So you have the longest, the second longest, the third longest, the fourth longest, so that it looks more symmetrical and it looks better. Another thing is the note that's on a piano, okay, the note you would sing, you would expect to hear if you played middle C on the organ. When you get a middle C, that rank is called an 8-foot rank because the longest pipe in that rank is 8 feet. Okay, and then we have ranks that play an octave above what you play. Anybody want to guess what they're called? How many feet? 4 foot. They're 4-foot stops, because the longest note is 4 feet high, ordinarily, usually. We have ranks that play 2 octaves above what you play on the keyboard. They sound 2 octaves above, and they are 2-foot ranks. Now, this organ doesn't have any 1-foot ranks, but there are such things. The problem when you get that high is, after a while, only a dog can hear the note, you know. You can see that a lot of these pipes are really tiny, and they're really high. Jason, you want to play the highest note on the 1 1/3? Go down till I can hear it. Okay, yeah, can you hear it? Yeah. How about an octave below what you play on the keyboard? How many feet would that be? From 8 to 16, right? If we're going down, we want a note to play an octave below, like on the pedal. We need to have 16-foot ranks. So the longest pipe is 16 feet, okay? Yeah, you can play a low 16-foot, okay? This organ has 32-foot stops, but it doesn't really have 32 feet high pipes. There's not room for them, and there's not money for them. You can imagine that one 32-foot pipe costs about as much to make as a whole rank of 4-foot or 2-foot pipes, because you can stand up in them, you can live in them if you want to. We have synthetic 32-foot stops. What they do is they go down as far as they can with 32, and then the way sound waves interact, if you play a note and a note a fifth above it at the same time, the sound waves will cancel each other out, and it will result in an octave lower sound. Give them bombard 32. Okay. Thank you. So that's 2 octaves. That plays 2 octaves below the note that you push. What would 3 octaves below be? How many feet? 32 times 2. We're already talking about 32 foot. 60. There are 2 64-foot stops in the world, one in the Sydney Town Hall and one in the Atlantic City Convention Center. The problem with them is when you get 1-foot pipes that are too high, you can't hear them. When you get 64-foot, I mean, first of all, they're outrageously expensive, obviously. Secondly, at some point, you can just feel them because you can't hear them. It's not an audible tone. So when we talk about 8-foot and 4-foot stops, that's what we're talking about. So there are 2 basic types of pipes: the flue pipe, and they come in slightly different shapes. I don't know if you can see over here. There's one that's tapered. Here's another example. In English, we call these chimney flutes. The German, it's more common to use the German name Rohrflöte, and Rohr actually means pipe, but we translate it as, so it's has a top and it has a stopper on the top. The reason for the different shapes of the pipes is they provide slightly different sounds. The biggest scale pipes have basically a fundamental tone, and they sound like flutes. So would you just play all of our flute stops for us? Or just one note on each, so we can compare them. vault flöte on the swell? Okay, can you hear that they're all flutes, but they're slightly different because they're shaped slightly differently? We can also have pipes that are made of wood. The mouth here and the toe. These particular, you can have open wood pipes like those. Some of those are open wood. One of those flutes that he played, the whole flute, Flöte in German, that's open flute. But a lot of them are stopped. And what a stopped, I'll show you what a stopper put on a pipe does. These are about the same length. I didn't make sure they were the same note, but okay. A stopper plays an octave below. So that's one way. If you don't have room for a full 16-foot stop, you can get a half-length stop. So you see a lot of these wooden ones are stopped flutes. Just a footnote, it goes the other way too. Harmonic flutes are twice the length, but they have a little hole halfway up. So they play at half their length, but once again, it's a different timbre, it's a different color of sound. Anybody asking what metal pipes are made of? The traditional metal was lead. This is lead, because lead is dirt cheap. It has a low melting point. It's easy to mold. It's easy to work with. So many pipes are lead. But if you look at these pipes, you see they don't look like lead. This is what we call spotted metal. Lead and tin don't alloy like copper and tin to make bronze. They end up with lead with spots of tin on it. So if you have 50% lead, 50% tin, this is what it looks like. As you get more lead and less tin, it's not visible, but the sound is different. If you remember the organ over in the auditorium, how bright and shiny it is, those pipes are pure tin. So tin's a little more expensive, but has a nice bright sound, and sometimes tin itself is used. When you get to the really big pipes, where the rest of them are lead, those can be too heavy. So those are made of nickel, often made of nickel, and they're painted to look like lead. So these here are painted gray so that, they probably look like lead. We talked about flue pipes with a large diameter. We call it a scale. We give us a flute kind of tone. If you use a narrower scale, you get what we call a principal tone or a diapason tone, and that doesn't mimic or sound like any other instrument. It's your basic organ tone. So Jason's going to play some of the principal tone. The 4-foots, just kind of play one of each so they can really compare. Okay, that's the principal tone. By the way, the ears just also affect the sound a little bit. Sometimes most of our pipes, you can hear the attack when it comes on. We call it chiff. Okay, for many centuries, that's the way organs sounded. In the 19th century, they wanted a smoother tone. So you get that by putting nicks in the mouth here. So most of these are not nicked. And then if you narrow the scale further, you get pipes that sound like strings. We only have one real string pipe. Okay, that's not like Celeste, right? That's just the... Right. And then you get kind of hybrids. Like we have a Gemshorn stop that's a principal, but it's narrower. It's more like a string. We use it as a string. And gem is the German word for a chamois, a mountain antelope in Europe. And their horns are often used. You put holes in them, and they're often used as instruments. When you later see the names of stops, it may be difficult to interpret them. It helps if you know different languages, because often a stop will be in German or French, which tells us that they're imitating that sound as it appeared in organs of that country. Most of ours have German. So we talked about Hohlflöte, open flute, Rohrflöte, chimney flute, Blockflöte, the recorder, and even the names of trumpets, depending how they're spelled. If they're spelled like the French word for trumpet, they're supposed to be French trumpets. If they're spelled like the German word for trumpet, trompeta, it tells you that it's a German type of trumpet stop. One way to get more of a string tone is to have a rank of string pipes and have a second rank that's tuned sharp to it, so that the sound waves interact and you get a wavy sound. In fact, some of those stops, one of those type stops is called an undamaris. Anybody know Latin good enough to translate that? The waves of the sea, okay? Then we have the second type of stop, which are reed pipes. And these, you can see, look very different. And they are very different. What vibrates here is the whole column of air. What vibrates on a reed stop is just this little brass reed. Okay, it's when you were in band, you had reed instruments, clarinets, saxophones, oboes. They're still the same on the organ, except trumpets are also reed stops on the organ, even though they would be brass instruments. And the way you tune a flute stop is to make it longer or shorter. If it's sharp, you need to take a metal tuning knife, and you pull this up until it's flat, and then you hit it until it comes into tune. And you can't do that with your finger because the heat of your hand changes the tuning on the metal. So these are tuned with tuning wires. This is the boot, by the way. The foot goes in the boot, and some of them are partially capped. Some are open reeds. This one's a closed reed. I wish I could play this one for you. This is a stop I have always wanted. There is a ton of music I say I cannot play on this organ because I don't have this stop. It's called a vox humana, meaning human voice. It's supposed to sound like a human voice. I don't know, singers in the 15th century when it was invented must have been pretty horrible singers because it's a horrible tone. It's not very pleasing at all, but a lot of music calls for it, and it's a very, very interesting shaped pipe. So what happens to metal when it gets warmer? And what happens to its tone then? It goes flat, right. And when it gets colder, it goes sharp. What happens to wood when it gets a little warmer, 10 degrees warmer? Not much, all right? So wood pipes, when the temperature changes, tend not to change much. Metal flute pipes tend to change a little more. Reed pipes change a lot because you just have this little thing. When it gets warm, you know, it's going to expand a lot more with 10 degrees than this whole pipe if it's heated 10 degrees. So often when Bill tunes the organ, he just tunes the reeds, meaning It just means that they've expanded more or contracted more than the other pipes. So they have to be tuned to bring them into it. Just one more thing on the mechanism, okay? So I talked about the Greeks had this box of wind, and they had holes in the top, and they had pipes sitting on them. That's okay if you want all the pipes to play. As soon as you start making air, they're all going to play. What the Greeks did invent was, we can call them sliders. They're pieces of wood with one hole in it. And they're attached to keys on the keyboard. So when you press the key, it pulls the slider back to align the hole between the chest and the pipe, and the air can go into it. When you release the key on the keyboard, then it goes back again, and the wood keeps the air from getting into the pipe. So that way you can actually play a tune. You can actually control what notes you were playing. During the Middle Ages, but you still, if you play, so as you get a second rank of pipes, there are going to be two holes in that slider, right? So when you press the key, both holes align with the pipes, and the air goes into both of them. If you have 3 ranks or 6 ranks or a dozen ranks, it would be just have more holes. During the Middle Ages, they finally came up with a way of stopping off some of those ranks so that you could play each rank individually. That's why we call them stops, when they really could be goes, because pulling one out, gets you the sound. So you have maybe a vertical slider with holes in it, that when you press the key, it shifts. You have another slider over it that is connected to the stops. So when you pull a stop, it's opened so that the air can go into one whole rank of pipes. But it still can't get in unless you play the key, because the second slider is closed. Once you have the stop pulled and the key depressed, both holes are aligned, and you get the sound. The organ in the auditorium uses slider chests. This organ uses a different mechanism that was developed in the 19th century, because the problem with that mechanism is that the keys and the stops have to be pretty close to the wind chest and the pipes, to the mechanism. I mean, because they're attached, they're connected by wooden rods. So when you press the key, a rod turns different things, and it opens the slider. And the longer you make those rods, obviously that limits where the organ can be. The original organ for this church was over in that archway, and it had the key desk right under the pipes. Once there was electricity in the church in 1911, they thought, gee, we're going to take advantage of this. We can have the console there, we can have pipes up here, and we can just have wires connecting them. And so this organ is what we call electro-pneumatic. It's a little more complicated mechanism. When you press a key down, it makes an electrical contact, sends a current to a mechanism under the pipe, and that activates an electromagnet, which then closes, opens a small channel of air into a pocket, which in turn creates a vacuum pulling on a piece of leather, which opens a larger channel and allows air into the pipe. Every time a key's been pressed over the last 48 years to play something, that leather has to flex in order to open the channel for the air. Okay, so how many millions of times that's happened, I don't know. And it's usually lambskin. They tried using synthetics back in the 70s when they thought synthetics would work for everything, and it was a disaster, because in 5 years it no longer work. They had to replace it with lambskin. So there's really no other substitute. A lot of these pipes are displayed. It was a style in the 1970s. Some of the pipes are in boxes with what we call swell shades, with louvers on it, that are connected to another pedal on the organ, so that you can close the box, you can close the louvers so that the sound doesn't get out as readily, or open them so that the sound can get out. So on this organ, two of the divisions, we'll use that term, two of the organs, the choir organ and the swell organ, are in boxes so that we can control the volume to a certain extent. But the great organ pipes, the pedal organ pipes, the positive organ pipes, the antiphonal organ pipes, they're just there. They play or they don't. And if you need more sound, you just add more stops. This organ is on very low wind pressure, because once again, in the 1970s, they were trying to imitate what they thought were German instruments from the 1700s, which were on low wind pressure. The pipework was exposed. The pipework was very bright. The pipework was very high and brilliant. And that's what they thought an organ like Bach would have played. So they tried to emulate that. And that includes low wind pressure. So the positive, I was just talking to Bill, is only on 1 3/4 inch pressure. Now to our particular project here. We'd love to do a lot of work on this organ, but all we had money for, and Bill told us our first priority needs to be to work on the reed stops, because, how can I explain this? The reeds, the little brass reeds, are held in place by little weights. And other companies solder their weights into the pipe. Austin just attaches them with an adhesive, which Bill calls wax. They call adhesive, I think. And so over 45 years, that wax or whatever deteriorates. When the weights fall out, then the reeds aren't contained the way they should be, and they become very difficult to tune. And the only way to tune them is then to work with the pipe itself, which is eventually damaging to the pipe. I mean, they're meant to be tuned with the wires. What we had money for in the organ fund was to send the reed pipes back to the maker and have them cleaned and repaired and reconfigured. Jason, would you play the reed pipes, just one note on each of the reed pipes?
That's a bad.
Okay, I don't want to take any of your thunder, but just notice that they sound kind of the same. Some are louder than others, but they have the same color, the same timbre, and that was the style at that period. But what Austin wants to do now is change the pipe so that they have different colors, so you can tell a trumpet from an oboe. So Jason's going to demonstrate the reed pipes.
Can you tell me from the list what I'm
Sure,
doing first?
sure. What you're doing first? First of all, he's starting with the great trumpet. The great is the second manual. It's the principal manual of the organ, and our great stops are over. You can't really see the trumpet. It's behind the facade pipes, but that's on this side.
That's going to be what it is. And I noticed when I was preparing this earlier, there's 1 or 2 pipes that are not working in here, and oftentimes when we practice and we know that that's going on, we will choose a rank of pipes that has the ones that we need when they're not working, but I'm going to leave it so you can hear it, because this is something that is part of the need for the renovation. As time goes on, more and more of them decide not to work when we're asking them to. So this is Flor Pater's trumpet tune with my glasses.
Okay, keep that sound in your head. Now he's going to demonstrate the crumb horn. Another problem with organ stops is they were invented before modern instruments were invented. So the crumb horn is an ancestor of the clarinet, and the stop was invented when people played crumb horns instead of clarinets.
Another cool thing to listen to here, everybody, when we do the crumb horn, there's a function called tremolo. So this is what it sounds like, but then we turn the tremolo on, and it gives a little bit of a variance to the wind pressure, and that causes a vibrato in it. So this is Healy Willin's Rockingham, which is When I Survey the Wondrous Cross.
Thank you, Jason. The crumb horn, the very tallest, narrowest pipes are the resonators for the crumb horn. And you can see that they're pretty straight. This one's flared, and it's half capped, but crumb horn pipes have that shape. The swell trumpet, so the swell is in the swell box behind that.
So this is a French piece. This is César Franck, the prelude from Prelude Fugue et Variation. And the swell, somebody asked, I think it was Terry, about the volume, starting with the doors shut, and then you'll hear it open and close to make the trumpet louder and softer. This is a hard piece to stop. It's very beautiful. We'll find a place to stop.
Thank you, Jason. This is not a criticism of Jason, but he was not totally accurate in writing down the stop name. He used the English word trumpet. If you look at it, it's spelled T-R-O-M-P-E-T-T-E. What language is that? French. That's trompette. So, and the great trumpet he used earlier is spelled T-R-O-M-P-E-T-E, only one T. What language is that? German, trompeta. So that tells you that this is supposed to be a French-style reed, and the one on the great is supposed to be a German-style reed. Are there any American stops? Not really. I mean, there's some weird ones, like the saxophone on some theater organs, but we usually play music from other cultures, or often. Now, the next one, he was accurate. It's a basson, which of course is French, right? He could have written bassoon, but this tells you it's another French reed.
So this is Bach's, one of Bach's settings of the Advent chorale, Nun komm der Heiden Heiland, now Savior of the Nations come. This is another one that's hard to stop.
Can you hear the chiff, the attack on those? It's not smooth, and that was on purpose.
That one is out.
That one probably has a weight missing, so it's impossible to tune. Okay, thank you, Jason. Once again, not at the risk of giving too much information, this is a 16-foot stop, but on this organ, the swell allows us, instead of playing it physically up an octave, to get it in the soprano range that he used. There's a stop called swell 4 that plays the notes up an octave, and there's also a stop that says swell off, so you can take off the 16 and just play it, have it played up an octave. Okay, so the last one he's going to demonstrate. Now let's see, he has clarion, which is a nice English term. The stop actually says H-O-U-T-B-O-I-S, hautbois, hautbois clairon. Okay, so we know that this is an oboe, clarion, from the French tradition. Or supposed to be.
This is
Hautbois is French. Hautbois, H-O-U-T-B-O-I-S.
This is Ralph Vaughan Williams' wedding tune for Anne.
4 years ago, during COVID, the representative from Austin came here If you remember, that was a winter we didn't have any heat in the church. So it was around freezing in here. It never got below freezing. We never had pipes freeze, but it was down to 35, 34 often in here. And we didn't know how the organ would survive that. It did. It came back. But that's when he was here and looked things over and took pictures. The leather reservoirs, the big pieces of leather that they noticed were failing, have blown holes in them. But the thousands of little leather pieces inside the chests are still working. You'll hear when they fail, because I'll be playing a piece or whatever, and I'll hit a key and nothing will happen. We hope to get that repaired on our own this spring. Austin said they were fine with Bill doing it, or fine with a local person doing that kind of leather, because it's just simply bellows that maintain a constant air pressure in the pipe. So it's large units with leather bellows on them. It's not difficult. What re-leathering Austin has to do, I told you that every time you put a key down, it eventually flexes a little leather pouch to let air into the pipe. So there are thousands of those little leather pouches that have been flexing for the last 48 years, and they need to be replaced. This console was built in 1978. If you think of your television from 1978, or you think of your record player from 1978, any electrical or electronic instrument like that, they've changed a lot in the last 50 years. And it uses technology that Austin patented in the 1920s. That's in need of updating. It's in need of repair. It's in need of updating. There are so many things that if we get organists coming in here, expect that they can do with modern consoles that have computers in them, a lot of computer chips, that you can't do with this. It's kind of, I guess, disconcerting to younger organists. So for the last 20 years, we've been hoping to replace the console before we had to work on renovating the instrument. That didn't happen, but we certainly hope that will be a priority in the project too, is replacing the console. What we really need is additional presets. You can, there are buttons under each of the manuals that allow you to set up certain stops, so that when you press that button, certain stops come down, and you can do it quickly instead of hand setting them. And we have only a limited number of those. When we've had recitalists, it's been a real challenge. Organs today have hundreds. You can have hundreds of those because they have levels of memory. If you have 16 buttons, you can have 100 levels of memory, 100 times that. So that, if I can, like when I play at Hope Church, I've got level 4 and 5. I can set up my presets, and another organist has level 2, and they can set up their presets. And all I have to do when I go there is press the level 4, and I'm set. Here there's only one level, so that you may have been to some recitals where where in the middle of it they've set up everything they can preset, and we have to stop, and I need to preset some more things, and they do other bells and whistles, like a next button, so you can set them up that instead of remembering that I need to press piston 11 and then piston 14, I just press next, and when I need the next sound, it just goes to it.
I wish for the parish to understand the changes that are going to be made here. This is important to me personally because, as you know about me, I spent a giant chunk of my time here focused on church growth and development. And, we see things in a perspective of really analyzing, is this welcoming? Is this something that's smooth? Is this something that makes people feel comfortable? And Terry did an awesome job of explaining to you the stylistic, why the organ sounds the way that it does. Sort of like my hair in the 90s. It was awesome in the 70s what this was trying to do. Very fashionable. But now, as he said, that the pendulum goes back the other way, we have this opportunity to revoice the organ. This is a term that we want everybody to know, revoicing some of these stops so that they sound more welcoming. And this is not something that just St. Luke's wants to do. A really high-profile organ, the Arendts organ at St. Thomas Fifth Avenue. If anybody knows that church, it's one of our favorite, that we try to emulate their program because it's so special. They had a gigantic Aeolian Skinner organ that they described as fiery, but not always great at supporting the congregation, not always great at supporting the choir, okay? This morning, we had the Psalm for Transfiguration, which is, God is great and powerful, and the heavens rain down upon him, and we praise him. And Terry has to use the trumpets to portray that. That you can't, as an organist, when you see those words, we need to use the trumpets. But even with those doors closed, the choir, and there were plenty of us today, we can't sing over it. It's too much power. It doesn't support us and let us paint this picture of our liturgy. So when we're talking about revoicing, this is sort of what we're talking about, to tone things down, to round them out, to make the congregation feel supported more. This is good for congregational singing. So how do they do that? Terry started to talk about this already. The aperture of the pipes, they can be adjusted to change that sound. I think they were talking about putting some types of caps on top of some of the trumpets to tone them down a little bit. So these are ways that we're going to get the reeds not only to just be a little bit more friendly, but to make them sound differently, to make the oboe sound like an oboe, to make the trumpet differentiate from the big trumpet in the back and the trumpet over here, the great trumpet. Part of the proposal from Austin is to add stops and to add synthetic stops. So there's a talk about adding a couple new sets of pipes, and there's a proposal to add electric, that we would have some speakers in the back. One thing that I was really interested in was the 32-foot sub-bass, which is a stop that shakes the whole room. And when we talk about the deep sea in the Psalms and the voice of glory thunders, that's a stop that we can really paint a picture with. And like he said, we're not going to have a 32-foot pipe in here. That comes out of a speaker, and that's a pretty standard setup. So that will be something that lets us paint a little bit more.
Yeah, electronic stops are no substitute for real sound. But if you're going to substitute them, having that rumble, there's not much difference between an electronic rumble and from a speaker and a real pipe rumble. You can get away with it on some of the pipes because they don't have a distinctive speech. Finance-wise, we had built up an organ fund over the years, hoping against hope we'd have enough money to replace the console. That never happened. Now the organ committee's decided to use that money to get the reeds, to send the reeds out and have them refurbished. So our organ fund is pretty well exhausted. We hope there'll be money to replace those leather reservoirs, that are easy to do. Beyond that, we'll need to replenish the fund. Organ building goes through fashions like everything else. For centuries, organs sounded like organs. And then in the late 19th century, people in America started hearing about these great orchestras in Europe and these great operas. And they wanted to hear the music. And the phonograph hadn't been invented. So one way for people to hear this music without American symphony orchestras really not being organized either was to have them played on organs, like in rich people's houses or in city halls, city auditoriums or whatever, or theaters. And so the fashion became for organ stops to imitate orchestral sounds instead of being organ sounds. So you went through that fashion in which you had a lot of weird stops like saxophones and even percussion stops and clarinets and tubas and whatever, so that they could bring this sound from Europe to people here. Once the phonograph was invented, particularly the LP, you didn't need that. And once you had talkies in the movie, you didn't really need to imitate sounds in a movie theater either. So the fashion went back to, it's called the Orgelbewegung movement. We want to rediscover what real organ sounds were. So we don't want them to imitate orchestras anymore. So that was from the mid-20th century, and this is kind of the result of that. They built these organs to try to imitate what they thought an organ that Bach played would sound like, with enough French stops in it so that we could play French music from the 19th century. Since then, we've learned more about 17th century organs, and this is not really what an organ that Bach would have played sounded like. An organ that Bach would have played was much more, the pendulum went from very mellow for these orchestral instruments to very bright. What Bach played was an organ that was totally in the center. I mean, it had foundation, it supported congregational singing, it had some brightness, but it was not on the edge of the scale like this. So part of what Austin would like to do if they're able to rebuild some of the pipes is bring it back toward the center, so that it's not as bright and thin. I'm trying to use English to describe sounds, and more supportive and more fundamental.